Rubio meets Netanyahu to discuss fallout from Israel's Qatar strike. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, with the aftermath of Israel's strike in Qatar expected to be high on the agenda. Last week's strike, which targeted senior Hamas leaders on the close U.S. allies' territory, drew international outrage and was criticized by President Donald Trump. Rubio earlier said, "Obviously we're not happy about it. The president was not happy about it. Now we need to move forward and figure out what comes next." The meeting comes as Arab leaders hold a summit in a show of support for Qatar. Its prime minister urged the international community to stop applying double standards and to punish Israel. The Gulf state hosts a major U.S. airbase and has played a key role in brokering diplomatic efforts to end the war in Gaza, serving as a mediator of indirect negotiations between Hamas and Israel. On Sunday, Netanyahu told reporters that the U.S.-Israel relationship was as durable as the stones in the Western Wall, while he and Rubio made a short visit to the holy site in Jerusalem's Old City. During the trip, on which they were accompanied by U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, Rubio wrote a note and placed it into the wall, a traditional ritual performed by visitors. The men ignored reporters' questions focusing on Israel's strikes in Qatar. Also expected to be under discussion between Netanyahu and Rubio are Israeli military plans to seize Gaza City and Israel's continued expansion of settlements in the occupied West Bank. Over the weekend, the Israeli military pressed ahead with the demolition of residential buildings in Gaza City, and, according to local media, is now poised to begin ground operations in the western neighborhoods of the city. It has demanded that Gaza City's residents leave and head south to a central area of the Strip. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, estimate about 250,000 Palestinians have fled, though hundreds of thousands are believed to remain in the area. Some say they cannot afford to go south, while others say southern Gaza is not safe as Israel has carried out airstrikes there too. Some have said they attempted to go south but were unable to pitch their tents, so returned to Gaza City. Netanyahu and Rubio's meeting comes ahead of a UN General Assembly session next week, at which some leading U.S. allies, including the UK, France, Canada, Australia and Belgium, are expected to recognize the state of Palestine. This expected recognition has intensified debate within Israel around the future of the West Bank, with more hardline elements of the government insisting annexation is the only way to prevent a Palestinian state. In late August, the Israeli government gave final approval for the E1 settlement project east of Jerusalem, which would, in effect, split the West Bank in two, dividing the Palestinian populations in the north and south. Signing an agreement to press ahead with E1 last Thursday, Netanyahu said, "We are going to fulfill our promise that there will be no Palestinian state. This place belongs to us." Earlier this month, Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich unveiled his proposal for the annexation of approximately 4/5 of the West Bank. Israel has built about 160 settlements housing 700,000 Jews since it occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem, land Palestinians want, along with Gaza, for a hoped-for future state, during the 1967 Middle East War. An estimated 3.3 million Palestinians live alongside them. The settlements are illegal under international law. On Monday evening, Rubio is set to visit the City of David Archaeological Park, which was established by a settler organization in the Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan, in occupied East Jerusalem. He will attend the inauguration of the Pilgrimage Road, a tunnel excavated underneath Palestinian homes that is said to mark the route of a Roman-era street taken by pilgrims to the biblical temple that once stood on the site known to Jews as the Temple Mount and to Muslims as Al-Haram al-Sharif, Noble Sanctuary. Critics say the City of David Park is an attempt to politicize archaeology, at the expense of Palestinian residents. "We escaped certain death. Israel intensifies Gaza City bombardment, forcing families to flee." Israeli forces have stepped up their assault on Gaza City with a wave of heavy airstrikes, marking a sharp escalation from previous military operations. Unlike earlier phases of the war, the current offensive has relied heavily on aerial bombardments, with entire apartment blocks and large concrete structures reduced to rubble. The intensification of strikes in recent days has triggered a surge in civilian displacement. Israel has warned all residents of Gaza City to leave immediately in anticipation of a huge ground offensive. On Saturday, the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, said about 250,000 people had left the city and moved south. It also said it had destroyed a high-rise building that it said had been used to advance and execute terrorist attacks against its troops. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the city is Hamas's last major stronghold. But the plan to occupy Gaza City has brought international criticism. The UN has warned an intensification of the offensive on an area where a famine has already been declared will push civilians into an even deeper catastrophe. Gaza City is the largest urban center in the territory and a historic heart of Palestinian political and social life. Residents say the Israeli military has been targeting schools and makeshift shelters, often issuing warnings only moments before bombardments. Many families have been forced to flee in darkness toward western Gaza. "We escaped certain death, my husband, our 3 children and I," said Sally Tafish, a mother sheltering in the city. "My brother died in my arms after being shot by a quadcopter drone. We ran in the dark to the west of Gaza." The Israeli military has told residents to evacuate to the south of the territory, but many families say they cannot afford the journey, which costs up to $1,100, £800. Hamas, meanwhile, has intensified its calls for residents to stay put and resist leaving the city. Rubin Khalid, a father of 9 preparing to move south, expressed frustration. The Hamas preacher at Friday prayers accused anyone leaving Gaza City of being a coward running from the battlefield, he said. But why doesn't he tell Hamas leaders to surrender and release the Israeli hostages so this war can stop? "We don't want to leave either, but we have no choice." Israeli forces have not yet reached some eastern neighborhoods that have remained largely intact since earlier raids in January, but the current campaign suggests they may now be seeking to dismantle entire districts. Meanwhile, a Qatari foreign ministry spokesman strongly criticized Israel's prime minister in an interview with the BBC following this week's Israeli strike on Hamas officials in the Qatari capital Doha. Foreign ministry spokesman Majid al-Ansari told the BBC that the international community had to deal with the Netanyahu problem. "He is not somebody who is listening to anybody right now, who is listening to any reason, and we have to collectively stop him in his tracks," the official said. He argued the strike in Doha showed the Israeli leader never intended to sign any peace deal to end the war in Gaza and instead believes he can reshape the Middle East in his own image. 5 of the group's members and a Qatari security officer were killed in Tuesday's strike, though the Palestinian armed group claimed no senior leaders had been killed. Hamas members had been in Doha to discuss the latest U.S. proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel has faced widespread condemnation, including at the UN Security Council. Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel targeted the terrorist masterminds behind the 7 October 2023 Hamas attack on Israel. Qatar's Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani earlier said that Qatar did not get advance warning of the strike, only receiving a call from a U.S. official 10 minutes after the attack had started. On Friday, Al Thani had dinner with U.S. President Donald Trump and his envoy Steve Witkoff in New York, having earlier met Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the White House. Rubio is traveling to Israel this weekend in a show of solidarity with Israel ahead of a UN meeting later this month at which France and the UK are expected to formally recognize a Palestinian state. On Saturday, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza said the bodies of 47 people killed by the Israeli military had arrived at its hospitals over the previous day. Since unbacked global food security experts confirmed a famine in Gaza City on the 22nd of August, the ministry has reported that at least 142 people have died from starvation and malnutrition across the territory. Israel has said it is expanding its efforts to facilitate aid deliveries and has disputed the health ministry's figures on malnutrition-related deaths. The Israeli military launched its campaign in Gaza in response to the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on the 7th October 2023, in which about 1,200 people were killed and 251 others were taken hostage. At least 64,803 people have been killed in Israeli attacks in Gaza since then, according to the territory's health ministry.